Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Ryan. I work here in the admissions office at Colby-Sawyer College, and I am joined by Professor Coy, who teaches in our psychology department. And Professor Coy, I'm going to turn it over to you for any kind of introduction you'd like to give yourself.
Hello, everybody. I'm Todd Coy. I've been here at Colby-Sawyer College for over 15 years now. I originally come from Houston, down in Texas, and came to grad school down in Boston, where I got my PhD at Tufts. And I've been here pretty much ever since. So I've always enjoyed it and appreciate the weather, the wonderful weather that we have here. Um, I teach in psychology, and we have a kind of a general model within psychology. So I do a lot of courses, different courses, but I'm also involved with the new neuroscience concentration. So it's psychology, but with the kind of a specialty towards neuroscience. And I teach at all levels. The kind of courses that I teach include introduction, of course. We have a writing course for psychology that's a 100 level. And then I teach some of our basic courses, such as neuroscience itself, which is one of the specialty courses. And then several different upper level courses, like the junior level 300 courses, drugs and behavior. I just started teaching psychopharmacology, which is a new course, human sexuality, health psychology. And then I also teach some of the upper level, senior level courses like statistics and research methods. So I really get the whole gamut of seeing students all the way from their first time they're on campus until they're walking across stage in that tent. And I'm also one of the advisors, because we want to advise all our psych majors. We like to have them with psych faculty so that you can get the best service as far as who knows more specifically about what concentration, if you want to declare a concentration. So been here for a long time and still love it.
Well, that's definitely a good thing to hear.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. So I think the question I'd like to start off with is one that I think this time of year most students tend to have, which is what would a day in the life of a psychology student on our campus look like? What should they expect, whether it's kind of like on a class by class basis or just kind of a broad overview of like these are the types of classes you would take, these are the types of experiences you would have. What does that look like?
I think first it's going to be a lot of orientation. Often the first few weeks, it's any kind of big life change like this is going to be very confusing. And even though the campus is small and very inviting, often students feel like they're lost and they keep wondering if they're in the right place, the right, so a lot of it is just you have to remain calm and know that if you haven't been through it before, we have. And so access those resources. So it's getting orientated to where the buildings are, where your room is, getting to the right classrooms. But generally, once you start getting into a pattern, the way that we set our classes up is that you'll have anywhere from 1 to 2, depending on maybe 3 classes within a day, about an hour each to maybe an hour and a half, hour 40, and you might have some labs and such. And really, the way you structure your day is going to be somewhat how you want. Now, maybe not the first semester, because a lot of these classes get picked for you because they're very formulaic. You need to take these particular starting classes. But as you progress through, you can take morning classes, evening classes, or afternoon classes. Some people like to stack them and use their alternating days for studying. So it's really a matter of how you set up your schedule to work. So you'll go to 1 or 2 classes. Again, in the morning, there might be a break between if you want lunch, that kind of thing. And then there's also the time that it's a little different now with COVID and all of that, but trying to connect with other students with clubs. You can do things like that in the afternoon, or a lot of times there's evening meetings. But that first semester is really just settling in and getting to know others, and getting to know the faculty, because you will be seeing us, repeatedly through. So making those connections and just feeling your way through. So things that seem scary at first, they won't be so bad after a few weeks.
Excellent. That's relieving to hear. I think I'd like to kind of build off of that. And I think a related question that oftentimes a lot of people they have in the back of their mind, but they may not necessarily think to ask is what are some other experiences, whether it's directly in the class, in a lab type setting, or outside the class, would some of our psychology students have maybe over the course of their 4 years, if it's focusing on research, what does that look like?
We have mechanisms where you can get some credits for doing some research assistantship if there's something that's interesting. I know with me, I've worked in the past with things like caffeine and nicotine, kind of the everyday types of drugs. And I've had students that were interested in that and they wanted to do that and get some credits for it, and they can. But we also build into the wider, over the 4 years, a structure where you get really the two sides of psychology, which is there's the research side and then there's the applied side. So one of our, and again, this is towards the end, that if everyone does their own particular capstone, which is an independent research project. And again, that sounds scary, but this is 3 years later. So you design your own experiment, you work with faculty and other students together on theirs and yours to put together an actual experiment that you will collect the data, you will analyze that data, you'll even present that data, get the full range of kind of a research experience. And that even includes getting IRB approval for your study to make sure it's safe and all of that. So it's really important. And then you have that, the last semester, you have the internship component. And that is where you go out into that world and you have a certain amount of hours that you spend on site at an actual place where you can apply some of these skills and learn a lot about what's going on in real world experience, so that when you go out, whether it's to grad school, which is always great, or going into a profession or starting somewhere, you've got both, because that's what they're going to want, is that real experiential kinds of learning. And so we have tried to set it up in that way, that you get a good foundation, and then by the time you're really practicing that, you've got a good understanding of what you might want to do. The hard part is deciding what you want to do. That's the hard part.
Definitely. And that's really interesting. I think I want to kind of drill down a little bit further into one of the things you brought up, which is we do pride ourselves on the fact that all of our students, they really do experience their education. It's not purely theory-based. You're not just sitting in a classroom listening to lectures and kind of moving through the motions in that sense. And I think one way that we do that really well is every student is required to have an internship completed regardless of their program of study before they graduate. Could you talk a little bit about what types of internship students in the psychology program have completed, have gone through, or maybe some that are going on right now?
First, I want to go on record. I do like me a good lecture now, so don't.
As a history major, I did too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, this is one where I don't want to frighten, because students, one of the big problems is, what do I really want to do? And that's what an internship is for. It's to give you some exposure to that. It's never too early to start thinking about internship, but when I'm talking to potential first-year students, they're like, wait, what? Where am I supposed to, so that you're going to have 3 years of exploration with the different areas in psychology. We design it so you have that plethora of experience where you have cognitive and neuroscience and social psychology and developmental aspect, and then you can decide what you might want to do. But we've had people that have worked, it really is mainly their interest. And that's why I always tell my students to, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? What do you want to explore? We've had them working, of course, in schools and local school districts. Some of them have returned to their own school districts where they were. We've had them work in corporations. I've had them work in marketing agencies, things that aren't really psychology. You might think that psychology is very involved in. We've had some that worked with lawyers. And others with advertising agents. Many will work in private practice. Some might be in more institutional settings. Some might work in private practices where they're allowed to sit in on some, say, group sessions, or they might do intakes. It really depends on what the student wants from that internship. I always tell them that the squeaky wheel, I tell my going into their internship, everyone needs people to file. And they're happy to let you file, unless you want to be proactive and what do you want to get out of it. So we talk a lot about that, about how to squeeze that experience out of it, good and bad. But also with a lot of child protective services, there's a lot of governmental agencies that they get that experience. So we had someone with the FBI a couple of years back that did it at the field office. I had one who had a research opportunity down at Columbia that he was able to go and partake in, and got some real hardcore, great research experience during that time period. So it really is wide open to what you want to do. And so you spend these first few years finding out what you really love or think you love, and then you find an internship that can help you explore that, good or bad, because then you've got some decisions to make about where you want that life of yours to go. And so that gives you some real valuable intel as far as what that might be.
That's really great. And I think a theme that I'm kind of picking up on in each of your answers so far is it sounds a lot like the role and the relationship that our prospective students and then our students on campus, once they're here with us, that they have with their faculty member. It's more than simply having an academic advisor. It sounds like you really do kind of become a mentor and walk them through, like, helping them to discover what their passion is, regardless if they know it right up front or if we need to leave breadcrumbs to help them find it. Could you talk a little bit about what that relationship is like between the student on campus, the faculty member, whether it is in the academic advising sense or kind of by the time they're graduating seniors, what that's kind of developed into, if that makes sense?
Yeah, well, I mean, students aren't coming here because of our brand new domed football stadium that seats 60,000 people. And, you're coming here because you want that kind of specialized interaction. I know the faculty that come here are attracted to here because, again, we don't want to sit in a classroom with 400 people that the teaching assistants deal with. We like the interaction too. One of the more rewarding things that you see is that first year student that's unsure of themselves. She doesn't know what she wants to necessarily do. She's unsure, and always that's the best kind of answer, because how could you know exactly what? And we also have those that are just, they know exactly what they want to do, and that might change. So it's really that sense of growth that happens. You go through the struggles together. You see them panic. You see them overcome that. You see them grow in confidence. You see them exasperated. You see them planning, and you see the wheels working when you're deciding on what kind of classes they would take semester to semester. Because after the first semester, you start picking your classes. And I make my students meet with me and my advisees because it's vital that I keep them in the rails, but I also kind of force them to choose the classes that they want. So if a student comes in and say, well, I don't know what history to take. And I'm like, well, I don't know either, because I already took my history. But it's to try to find the history that's going to be the most meaningful to you, even if it's not necessarily an area of interest, like whether it be a science or a lit. I want them to find the most tangible, the most meaningful for them. And that just takes a lot. And then it's a matter of just fitting it into your schedule too. So there's a lot of the ins and outs that students have to learn, but I kind of want to probe as far as finding out what it is that they want to do, so they can look back and they've had a good experience in their courses as far as that goes.
That's great. That sounds incredibly supportive, which I think is what people really are at the core. What they want, especially in their first year, is to know that they are supported. We've covered a lot of ground so far. So actually, I want to check in with Marie and Ariana and see, do either of you have any questions so far? What's kind of percolating in your brain right now?
I was just wondering, what's like schedules and like the difference between a psychology student with a concentration, like without a concentration?
Great question.
Since we've started, that was relatively new. We went through a program review, and we started that a lot of students, they like to kind of know what they're going to be doing. The real difference between concentrations and our traditional kind of general psychology, which you're still welcome to take, by the way, you do not have to declare a concentration. It's there, but I would say the main difference is that when you declare a concentration, it mainly picks your electives for you. It's electives that are all appropriate for that specialization. Now, if you stay the general, just psychology, you could still take those same electives, and you can design it the way you want, or you could mix those. So if you don't want to be too specialized in one, you could pick any elective that you want. And what I find a lot of times with good planning, that my advisees can still take even extra classes that if they want, that would be counted as just purely free electives, by proper planning and but that's the main difference. So if you're taking a specialization, you're going to have largely the same kind of basic classes, and you'll have the same kind of senior level finishing classes. But those, say, 300 level, we call them junior level, but you can take them even as a sophomore. Those are somewhat dictated by the schedule. So if you look at the the college book and you see the scheduled classes for a particular concentration, those just kind of let you know that you will be taking those particular ones. So some people like that. Others would rather have a little more flexibility, and that's why we kept the original general one still there too. Does that make sense? So it's really more of like you'll have 3 or 4 classes that are now listed for you, as opposed to just having blank spaces you fill in there with those classes.
It's a great question. Any other questions? Okay, excellent. Well, thank you for asking. We'll keep on rolling then. So I think one thing that we haven't quite talked about, we've hinted at a little bit, is Colby-Sawyer really is a very intimate community here. It's one that's a little bit smaller. I'd love to kind of hear, knowing that traditionally psychology is considered one of the larger programs that any given university a student might be looking at. What would you say is like the average class size that they might expect to go into when they come onto campus, or a student to faculty ratio? Like, what would their classroom community kind of feel like?
The smallest I've had, well, this is cheating a little, it has been special arrangement courses where, because sometimes it's difficult to schedule, because being small, we don't have so many classes I've given students where they have basically an individualized class where they meet with me once or twice a week for several hours. We have readings, and so it's kind of a class of one, but that's not the norm. Don't expect, that's happened when a student needed a course and it wasn't offered right when they needed it, that kind of thing. But I'm teaching psychopharm, which was the first one. It's a new course, and it's kind of sciencey and all that. I've got 9 students in there. That's not completely unusual at all. Normally, for my first years, it can range to around maybe 25. And again, because of the COVID oddities, I've split my classes for distancing, so they're kind of coming in at multiple times, so it seems much smaller even. But I would say usually 25. I've done before a double section, which, but even then it's limited to, I would say less than 50, but again, that's a double section. Generally they're split, where we cap it at around 25. And that's what my experience has usually been. That's only very occasionally when I was teaching 2 sections of the same course, and it worked out schedule wise. It was for that, but that's, again, that's kind of like the special arrangement courses. That's not the usual ones. So I would say anywhere from the teens to around 20. That's really what you normally would expect in psychology.
Excellent, thank you. And I think, thinking back to my earlier question about internships, I think the other side of that ends up becoming outcomes. And when we think of psychology, I think a lot of people know that a lot of the undergraduate psychology programs they go into, it's a launching point into going into a future graduate program. Could you talk a little bit about what are some of the common types of graduate programs we've seen our alumni go off into, or if they have gone directly into a career after graduation, what are some of those opportunities that you've seen our alumni go into?
Yeah, well, we have a lot of success, I mean, which is great for a smaller school in getting students into graduate programs. And again, this is one of those where any psychology program you go to, you don't graduate as a psychologist per se, like where you can license and see people. That takes a lot of specialized training. It's like pre-med going into medical school type of thing. So if you're interested in counseling, the clinical side of those types of things, actually seeing clients and working with people, that's going to demand that you take at least a master's level program. And so we designed this to maximize your ability to get into those programs. And we've got a list out in the hallway that lists some of these, but we've had recent people go to Columbia, to Tufts, to Springfield, Rivier for their master's programs, but a lot of schools down in UMass Boston. It really depends. By that time, you have a good idea of what you want. And so often I'm talking with seniors and even juniors, kind of planning that out. Well, what's it going to take? What do I need to do? What's the process? And it's really similar to what I do, which is finding out what they want. And that includes, like, where do you want to live for the next 3 or 4 years if you want to go to grad school? And that sounds trite, but it's true. Do you want to experience a bigger city? Do you want to stay rural? I actually came up to the north because I grew up in Houston. It was always hot. I wanted to see a different part of the country. So I started looking in the Boston area, and it was that shallow of a reason. But I was very happy, doing that, the lifestyle. And here I am, many years later. So we have a lot of success with that. We also have success with students that want to go into related fields. I don't ever want to make promises and all that, but we do have a lot of students that are often offered positions to continue on where they're interning, whether it's with a state agency or if it's with a school district or something along those lines. Again, that's really more of a mesh. And we've had students turn those down because they want to go into grad school to continue on with their education. So, I mean, even there, we have had people that go on to be professors themselves. We've got people who are holding some, there's one that is working at St. Anselm as one of their advising groups there. That others that are one of the lead technicians down at Brigham and Young's medical school. They're doing some of the neurological kind of testing and on. So there's really a wide range of that. But I always want to be clear that you don't go out and you buy yourself a couch and you start seeing clients. It's not the way it works. So usually it goes into a graduate, and that could be a master's, that could be a doctorate, and there's a couple different kinds of doctorates that you can go into. But again, if you want to go into advertising, human resources, or you can do that as well. I think it's one of the more common majors for people even going into to law school and such. It's very common for them to have some of that background too. And then we've got legal studies where you could minor and all that too. But so psychology is one of those fields that has so many tentacles that almost anything you do, it's not just a good major, it's one of the more popular minors that people take that are in business or in something else.
Definitely. I think that's all of this is really culminating, I think, in my favorite question to close with, which is, you mentioned you've been here now for 15 years at Colby-Sawyer teaching and working with our students. What's been your favorite teaching moment?
See, now I'm terrible. When we are dug in, like in neuroscience, and I can feel the palpable, they are almost like they don't get quite something. And when I have, whether it's been popped on mine or I've got scrolled in my notes from past semester, where I have an example that I can see the light bulbs kind of click on when they finally get it, that kind of aha moment when they understand that. And there are times where, again, you should be pushed, and you're going to be pushed academically, but it's that moment of where they get it. And, that happens. It could happen in statistics when they finally get it. There's things in statistics that I still haven't gotten, but when I see a student finally grasp something, or of course, when they do hear of news that they get into a grad program that they're wanting to get into or get offered, that type of thing. Or those senior year, when we have events, we usually have our annual cookout. Again, all this stuff has been COVIDized or whatever, but where you kind of talk with them and see where they're going, and you'd be surprised how quickly, when I'm looking at those planning worksheets, which seems so perfunctory, but you see them go from a bunch of blanks to a bunch of these courses with grades, and they'll sit back usually and just realize, look what everything that I've done. And it does happen. It's like seeing this fresh rollover of always having that kind of growth. So I like that. I mean, that's why I'm here, is because you like putting that understanding. I mean, again, I like the pushing and the making them work, but I like when they do that and they see they can do that, and there's that reward in that regard. So
excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think let's finally turn it over to our two guests again, just to see, Marie and Ariana, any new questions you've kind of thought about before we close? Ooh, here's a good question that's coming through the chat. Have you had many students that went on to work for the FBI?
I'm trying to think if they went into law enforcement, but that particular individual, he went there, had a great experience, but it was actually one of the, well, I don't want to get off into the it was also with his partner, there were decisions they had to make and that type of thing, and I think that kind of skewed it. But with the forensic psychology, I mean, it's something that could possibly, absolutely happen. It's just a lot of it depends on how proactive the student wants to be also about finding that kind of experience that they want to. Whether it might be with a local law enforcement, or if it's with some kind of private practice that does a lot with forensics, or with a department or a state agency, that might work with investigative and all of that. But there's just one, I remember that he went through and did the FBI. He didn't join the FBI, but yeah.
Excellent. Any other questions? Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much, Professor Coy, for all the information you've shared, and thank you to our students for joining us. I really appreciate all of you coming together.
Thank you very much. It was nice meeting you, and I hope to see you again.